Story 1. The Man Behind the Couch by Daniel Carter. This happened to my dad when he was a little kid. I think it messed him up a bit emotionally, but he never admitted it. The story freaks me out just imagining it. So I'm pretty sure my dad was 10 years old, and he was home alone for whatever reason. He was watching TV in the living room. It was the only TV in the house, and all of a sudden, the TV just shut off. So he got up and turned it back on. It was an old shitty TV, so it wasn't weird at all. When he got back on his couch, it happened again. Got up once again and turned the TV back on, and again it turned off. He repeated this process a couple more times before he started to look for the remote. The room felt eerily quiet without the TV's background noise, and goosebumps raised on his arms. While looking for the remote, he walked over to check behind one of the couches. His heart nearly stopped as he saw a man hiding in the corner holding the TV remote. My dad described the man as having long, messy hair and a crazed look in his eyes. The stranger's fingers were grimy, clutching the remote like a lifeline. He gave my dad a smile, yellowed teeth gleaming in the dim light. My dad's blood ran cold. In that moment, he remembered his grandmother's words. Seek refuge in Allah from the evil of that which He has created. But terror overrode everything else. He ran out the front door, screaming like a little girl, his feet barely touching the ground. He went to his neighbors, who called the police. The man was still in the house when the police got there, so he was arrested. My dad told me that he still assumes the man was either homeless or crazy. Either way, this story is downright terrifying. Sometimes I wonder if that experience is why my dad always triple checks the locks at night. The thought of a stranger hiding in our home still makes my skin crawl. Story 2. The Man in the Coat by Emily Rhodes. My friend told me about something that happened to her when she was younger, about 8 or 9. She was walking home from school and got her key out to let herself into the house. Her single mom worked and came home later on weekdays. The familiar street suddenly felt different that day. Quieter, more ominous. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As she reached up to put the key in the door, her mom opened it in a dressing gown, having left work sick. Instead of greeting her, she looked straight past my friend and immediately said, "Who are you?" My friend's stomach dropped. She slowly turned around, her heart pounding in her chest. A man in a long coat hurried back down the path and down the street. His footsteps echoed on the pavement as he disappeared around the corner. My friend stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Her mom pulled her inside and locked the door, hands shaking. Being ill that day had possibly saved her daughter from something potentially horrible happening to her. Later that night, as they sat together on the couch, her mom whispered a prayer. "O Allah, I seek refuge in you from every evil and from the evil of every creature you take by the forelock." My friend never walked home alone again after that day. The image of that man in the coat still haunts her dreams sometimes. Story 3. The Finger Around the Door by Jacob West. Before I start this story, I want to note that my mother is a drug addict, and my father really didn't have much wrong with him outside of being with my mother. So one night when my dad and I were asleep, we heard a series of loud banging, scratching, and moving noises coming from my mom's room. The sounds pierced through the silence of the night, making my skin crawl. My dad jumped out of the bed, ran down the hall, and started slamming on the door. My mother opened it, yelling at him to quiet down, and that he woke her up. He asked her about the sounds. She hadn't been awake to hear them. My dad would have assumed she was on something again, but something was wrong. The air felt thick with tension. The window was open all the way, and the TV was moved across the room, still plugged in, with the screen facing outside. My dad was reasonably scared. He shut the window, got in bed, locked the mother's room from the outside, and made her sleep in the living room. He stayed up most of the night, his eyes darting to every shadow. He woke me up at 5. It was still dark out. I went out to the kitchen where my mom already was. A couple minutes later, my dad walked in, wide-eyed. He pointed at me and my mother and held his finger to his lips. We both quieted down. We heard something shuffling around on the roof, going from edge to edge. The sound of scraping against the shingles made my blood run cold. My dad had the bat. We sat together in the room quietly. Minutes later, the sound went away. My grandmother was called, and she was asked if everybody could stay over there for a little while. She said yes, and told us she'd come pick us up. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noises. I finished eating and went to go sit on the couch. There was no TV in that room, so I sat in silence. I looked over at a door to an empty room in the hallway. The door was open. There was a finger wrapped around the side of it. I screamed and pointed to it, and my dad grabbed me and ran out. My mom followed behind. We went to a gas station and sat out front until we saw my grandmother's truck. I described how unnatural the finger looked to me. I said it reminded me a little bit of a foam finger in length and width. It was wrapped clear around the door frame, the door itself being latched on the opposite side. We didn't go back to that house much after that. Once we'd gotten everything out of it, we never went back again. Nothing was stolen, and the window in the empty room was open. That night, as we huddled in my grandmother's house, she recited a verse from the Quran. Say, "I seek refuge with the Lord of the Dawn, from the mischief of created things." It brought little comfort, but it was something to hold on to in the darkness. Story 4. The Shadow at the End of My Bed by Dylan Harper. I was 13 years old. I had the most isolated bedroom imaginable. Mix that with a wild imagination, and I was often up late at night, scared and paranoid, unable to fall asleep. My bedroom was a separate floor of the house on the opposite side of my parents' room. They had no way of hearing what was going on in my room. So it was a seemingly ordinary night, with a bit of rain, but not a storm. I woke up and looked at my clock and saw that it was 2 a.m. I got an uncomfortable feeling right away, but I didn't know why. I then saw at the edge of my bed there was a shadow of something roundish just over the head of the edge of my bed. My heart started racing until I realized it was just my hat. I sometimes hung my hat on one of the wooden poles at the edge of my bed, so I calmed myself down and fell back asleep. I woke up again around half an hour later and was again startled by the sight of the shadow at the end of my bed. But after my brain started to fully wake up, I remembered it was just my hat again. This process happened one more time that night, probably another half hour later, and once again I was startled by the sight of the shadow. The rain had picked up, tapping against my window like skeletal fingers. I was getting thirsty, so I reached my hand down to the side of my bed looking for my water bottle. But I instead found something else, ... my hat. And at that instant, I felt my heart drop into my stomach, as I almost fell out of my bed trying to turn the lamp on. My fingers fumbled with the switch, panic rising in my chest. The light revealed the face of a man peering over the edge of my bed, staring right into my eyes. His gaze was unblinking, a twisted smile playing on his lips. I let out the highest-pitched scream a boy could possibly produce and ran straight past the man and down the stairs of my room. I felt the man try to grab me, but I managed to open the door and run to my parents' room to get my dad. My dad got the bat from under his bed and rushed to my room, but he was too late. When we got back to my room, the window was wide open. Apparently the man jumped out onto the patio roof outside my window. The curtains billowed in the wind, rain spattering the floor. As we stood there, shaken, I remembered a prayer my mother taught me. "O Allah, I seek refuge in you from the evil of my hearing, the evil of my seeing, and the evil of my tongue." But I couldn't shake the feeling that evil had already found its way in. Story 5. Hunted in the Woods by Tyler Jennings. When I was a kid, I had a huge group of friends that all happened to be on my block. On the weekend nights, we would always play manhunt, aka hide and go seek for older people. It worked out great because, since we were all neighbors, we used all the front and backyards and even the woods behind our houses. We had a rule, though, that we couldn't go out more than a backyard's length into the woods. I always used the same hiding spot, and nobody ever found me. I always hid behind an old rusty barrel that was thrown into the woods years ago. The familiar scent of damp earth and decaying leaves usually brought comfort, but tonight something felt off. So on this particular night, there were only 6 of us playing. My friends Joe and Raj were on my team, quickly dispersed as we were the first to hide. I ran to my usual hiding spot through my backyard into the woods behind the barrel. Usually I would see the flashlights of the other team shining through the backyards in the woods. But it was unusually quiet this time. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. And then I finally heard footsteps nearby. I didn't see a flashlight, so I assumed it was one of my teammates. I whispered Joe and Raj's names, but then whoever it was started charging at me, full and sprinting. The sound of heavy breathing and crashing through underbrush filled my ears. My heart leapt into my throat. I immediately shot up and ran out of the woods to find a new hiding spot in my backyard. But nobody ever came out of the woods. I heard all my friends calling my name from out front, including Joe and Raj, so I assumed something was wrong and went up front. My legs felt like jelly as I stumbled towards their voices. I saw Joe's parents talking with my parents, with all my friends surrounding. My parents seemed a bit relieved to see me, so I was naturally really confused. They told me that a police officer had just passed by and warned them about a serial rapist spotted in the area, and that all the kids should stay indoors. A chill ran down my spine as I realized how close I might have come to danger. I explained what happened to me in the woods, and my parents started freaking out. I was making 100% sure that I wasn't lying. They called the police. I really don't know if he was ever caught, but I really hope he was. I try not to think about what would have happened to me had whoever that was caught me. That night, as I lay in bed unable to sleep, I remembered a verse from the Quran my grandfather often recited, and whoever puts all his trust in Allah, He will be enough for him. I clung to those words, hoping they would keep the nightmares at bay. Story 6. The Heavy Sigh, by Brandon Ellis. When I was about 12 or 13, my family and I went on a weekend beach trip. It was me, my mom, my stepdad, and our 2 dogs. We rented this apartment at the far end of the shore. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary when we first arrived. We unpacked our stuff and headed out for dinner right away. We got back around 9 p.m. and watched some TV for an hour or so. My parents and the dogs slept on the pull-out couch in the living room, while I got the bedroom with the king-sized bed all to myself. I stayed up late playing games on my computer. I had made sure to install some beforehand since I knew there wouldn't be internet. Finally, I decided it was time to get some sleep. I shut down my computer and crawled into bed. The room fell into complete silence. It was just starting to drift off when suddenly, I heard this incredibly loud sigh, echoed through the room, sending chills down my spine. I knew it couldn't have been my parents or the dogs. The door to the living room was closed tight. My heart started racing. Without thinking, I bolted out of that room as fast as I could. I ended up in the bedroom across from the master, my pulse pounding in my ears. I was absolutely terrified. Needless to say, I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. The next morning, I told my parents what happened. They brushed it off, saying it was probably just my imagination running wild. But I knew what I heard. That sigh was as real as anything. To this day, I can still hear it echoing in my mind, reminding me that some things can't be explained away so easily. Story 7. The Woman in the Closet. By Marcus Blake. This story still gives me nightmares to this day. I was staying with one of my best friends, Mike, in North Carolina for a job interview. I'd come down from New Jersey, and Mike offered to let me crash at his place for a few days. His house was about 2 hours from the company I was interviewing with, but I figured it was a good chance to catch up with an old friend. After my second interview, I came back to Mike's place in high spirits. I had been offered the job on the spot. We decided to celebrate in the backyard that night with a few friends and a few beers. Well, maybe more than a few beers. We stayed up late, getting absolutely wasted. People were coming and going all night. Mike was never one to keep close tabs on who was in his house. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, after everyone had left, we finally called it a night. I stumbled up the stairs to use the bathroom, barely able to keep my balance. As I was splashing some water on my face, I caught a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision. I turned towards the half-open door and saw an eye staring at me through the crack. I let out a loud, holy expletive, and in my drunken state I fell right to the floor. When I managed to get back on my feet, the eye was gone. I called out for Mike, hearing him respond from the kitchen downstairs. There was no way it could have been him. I hadn't heard anyone on the stairs. Odd, but I asked anyway if he had been up there. As expected, he said no. In my inebriated state, I brushed it off as a drunken hallucination. I made my way to the guest bedroom and practically collapsed onto the bed, barely managing to pull the covers over myself. You know how alcohol makes you fall asleep faster? Well, that's an understatement. I was out cold within seconds. I woke up sometime later, my head already pounding with the beginnings of a nasty hangover. It was just before sunrise, and the room had a distinct chill to it. My foot was sticking out from under the covers, dangling over the edge of the bed. And then it happened. I felt something ice cold grab onto my foot and start stroking it. A raspy voice whispered, "Can you help me?" I bolted upright, screaming at the top of my lungs. I sprinted out of the room and ran straight into Mike at the top of the stairs. I called the police, who arrived shortly after. Turned out the intruder was a woman in her late 40s, clearly struggling with addiction. She admitted to simply walking into Mike's house during the party and hiding in a closet. The eye I saw in the bathroom, that was her watching me. I remembered a verse from the Quran my grandmother used to recite when I was scared. And whoever fears Allah, he will make for him a way out. 65-2. In that moment, I clung to those words, finding a strange comfort in them as the reality of what happened sank in. Needless to say, I always make sure to tuck my feet under the covers now. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows, waiting to reach out and grab you. Story 8. Footprints that Disappear. By Kevin Holloway. It was the dead of winter, and a couple of buddies and I were on a skiing trip near South Lake Tahoe. We had rented this big, luxurious log cabin for a few nights. On the third night, during a pretty intense blizzard, I got up late to grab a glass of water. As I was crossing the cabin to get to the kitchen, there was a frantic knocking at the door. It startled me. Who would be out in this weather, knocking on our door in the middle of the night? My first instinct was to ignore it and hope they'd go away. But then I realized they must know we were here. My car was parked right outside, clearly visible. I also had this nagging thought that maybe someone was in trouble and needed to get out of the dangerous weather. I tiptoed over to the door, my heart racing, and waited. It didn't take long before the knocking came again, this time even louder and more frantic than before. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. I asked again, louder this time, but still nothing. After that, the knocking stopped completely. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door a crack, leaving the chain lock on just in case. There was nobody there. The porch was empty, save for the swirling snow. I undid the lock and opened the door fully, peering out into the storm. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the snow, leading away from the cabin. For some stupid reason, maybe guilt or worry for someone in need, I slipped on my boots and jacket and stepped out into the blizzard. I followed the footsteps, squinting against the biting wind and snow. They led me to the edge of the property, and then they just stopped. I swear to you, the footprints ended abruptly. There were no tire tracks, no signs of a struggle. Nothing. It was as if whoever made the tracks had simply vanished into thin air. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I sprinted back to the cabin, slamming the door behind me and making sure to lock it. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Before I could even catch my breath, the frantic knocking at the door started again. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I screamed for my friends, and they came rushing down to see what was wrong. When we opened the door together, there was nobody there. And the footprints. They were already filled in by the falling snow. I never could convince my friends of what happened that night. I don't blame them for not believing me. Sometimes I can hardly believe it myself. But I know what I saw. I just can't explain it. That's what makes it so terrifying. To this day, whenever I hear an unexpected knock at the door, I'm transported back to that snowy night. I find myself reciting the words from the Quran. Say, I seek refuge in the Lord of Daybreak from the evil of that which he created. 113-122. It's a small comfort against the unexplainable, but sometimes it's all we have. Story 9. The Gate That Shouldn't Open, by Emma Caldwell. My friend and I were heading to a party a few hours out of town, so we decided to crash at her family's holiday house, about an hour south of the venue. We arrived in the mid-afternoon, and being winter in a holiday town, the place was like a ghost town. Not another car in sight. When we left for the party, I spent a moment debating whether to pull the gate all the way closed. I'd had some trouble opening it earlier, and I was worried about getting stuck outside if we came back late. In the end, I decided to shut it for security. The party was a blast, and we got back to the house around 12:30 a.m. as we pulled up. My blood ran cold. The gate was wide open. I knew I had locked it, and it wasn't the kind of gate that could just blow open in the wind. I tried to brush it off, not wanting to freak out my friend, so I was vague when she asked if I'd shut it. We went inside and decided to make a late-night snack. I was wandering through the house when suddenly my friend came tearing out of the kitchen and practically tackled me to the ground. She was convinced she'd heard someone walking around outside. We tried to calm ourselves down, but it was useless. We had no cell reception, and there wasn't another soul for miles. Over the next half hour, as we sat huddled in the hallway, paralyzed with fear. We heard footsteps outside, and what sounded like someone trying to jimmy open the back door. The sound of metal scraping against metal sent shivers down my spine. I could feel my friend trembling next to me, and I knew we had to get out of there. We gathered our things as quietly as possible, ready to make a break for the car. Just as we reached the front door, there was a deafening bang from the backyard. Suddenly the air was filled with what sounded like hundreds of birds screaming. The noise was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was almost otherworldly. We didn't hesitate. We ran to the car, not even bothering to put our stuff in the back seat. As we reversed out of the driveway, I saw a dark figure running up the side of the house towards us. I couldn't make out any features, just a shadow moving impossibly fast. We sped the entire way home, our hearts pounding in our chests. Neither of us slept that night, jumping at every little sound. In the quiet moments between our panicked whispers, I found myself reciting a verse from the Quran that my mother always said in times of fear. And when you have decided, then rely upon Allah. Indeed, Allah loves those who rely upon Him. 3-159. It was a small comfort, but it helped me get through that terrifying night. To this day, I can't explain what happened at that holiday house, but I know that sometimes the things we can't explain are the most frightening of all. Story 10. The Thing in the Boiler Room by Jordan Bennett. When I was 10 and my youngest brother Ben was only 1, our parents were painting our bedrooms one weekend, so we had to sleep in the basement. There was a pull-out couch down there that turned into a bed, and we had an extra crib for Ben. Being only 10, sleeping in a pitch-dark basement was pretty uncomfortable for me. Somehow, having Ben down there made me feel a bit safer. He would wake me up in the middle of the night crying, and for some reason, tending to him made the whole experience a little less scary. But there was this one night that I woke up to Ben screaming. Not crying, but screaming in a way that no 1-year-old should ever scream. It was a sound that chilled me to my very core, a primal shriek of pure terror. I was instantly wide awake, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I ran over to Ben's crib to see what was wrong. He was standing up, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes, pointing at something behind me. Slowly, I turned to look in the direction he was pointing, straight into the pitch-dark boiler room right next to his crib. In that moment, I felt like 1,000 ice-cold knives had just stabbed me in the chest. The air seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. Even through the panic of the moment, I vaguely remember hearing the faint sound of something falling over in the boiler room. And then, the overwhelming sensation that we were being watched. I scooped Ben up into my arms and bolted out of there as fast as my legs could carry us. As we fled up the stairs, I could have sworn I heard something moving in the darkness behind us. The sound of heavy, labored breathing that definitely wasn't ours. We burst into our parents' room, both of us in tears. They tried to calm us down, to convince us it was just a bad dream. But I knew what I had experienced was real. The terror in Ben's eyes, the oppressive darkness of that basement, the feeling of being watched. It was all etched into my memory. In the days that followed, I found myself reciting a verse from the Quran that my grandfather had taught me. Say, I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind, the sovereign of mankind, the God of mankind. From the evil of the retreating whisperer, 114-1-4. Those words became a sort of shield, a way to push back against the fear that threatened to overwhelm me. To this day, I have never gone back down to that basement. Some things are better left in the dark, undisturbed and unexplored. But the memory of that night still haunts me, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things are those we can't see, but can only feel in the depths of our souls.